Crossfire. Let's talk through what is different, what's unique about Crossfire. What is the Crossfire? Crossfire, we already know this. It's the 3-minute period, right? 3-minute period.
Shoot questions.
Where you're shooting questions back and forth at one another. So if it's Devontae versus Alan in a Crossfire, then Alan's going to ask Devontae a question. Devontae's going to answer it. Then Devontae's going to ask Alan a question. Alan's going to answer it. And we're going to go back and forth like that, right?
Like 4 minutes.
That's what, exactly. For 3 minutes, between 2 or all 4 debaters. When does it happen?
It happens for 3 minutes.
It happens for 3 minutes.
After,
and it happens,
after the speeches, like the...
Exactly. After the constructive speeches, right?
Speeches.
So after the second and fourth constructive speeches. Because unlike cross-examination debate or Lincoln-Douglas debate, we're going to have 2 speeches and then the Crossfire. Instead of having speech, cross-X, speech, cross-X, speech, cross-X. We're going to have 2 speeches and then the Crossfire. Got it?
I have a question. In the Crossfire, can you ask any question?
You can ask any question you want.
I'm just on topic, right?
I mean, you could ask an off-topic question, but why? Why waste your time?
No.
Like, you also have a third Crossfire, which is after the summary speeches. After the summary speeches. Both debaters are going to ask and answer questions. And this is what makes it unique. Both debaters are asking and answering questions instead of just Devontae asking Alan questions or vice versa. You should stand up during Crossfire. Stand up. You don't want to be sitting down. It just makes it looks more professional if you're standing up. Sometimes the judge will have you stay sitting for the grand Crossfire, the one where all 4 people are going, just because it can be hard to see the people in the back. But generally, you want to be standing up. What is the purpose? What are we doing? Why are we having a Crossfire? Why do you want to Crossfire? Why do you want to be Crossfire?
To discuss the resolution, to prove
Exactly.
whether it's right.
We're talking about the resolution. We're trying to figure out why your side of the resolution. So let's assume you guys are on the pro. You're saying that the government should allow financial incentives for organ donation, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're going to allow financial incentives for organ donations, then you need to have reasons. And you're going to go through those reasons. So the first purpose of Crossfire, just like cross-examination, is to clarify. Clarification. You want to clarify what's going on. If you miss something or want to be sure, the other side really did say something. So, Devontae, if Alan is speaking and he says something like, there are only 5 people in the world who have ever received an organ transplant. You might say, that just sounds really weird. So you're going to ask, you're going to say, did you really mean that there are only 5 people in the world who've ever had an organ?
Yeah, statistics.
Exactly. And you're going to ask just to clarify and make sure they said something. So that's the first purpose.
You have to provide facts.
Exactly. And how do we find facts? What is it in? Evidence.
Evidence.
Right?
The
second thing you want to do is identify weakness. Identify weaknesses. You want to identify and exploit the holes in their logic and arguments. The third thing you're going to do is defend your position. The way you do this is by answering the other team's questions. You're going to defend your side when you are answering their questions.
Yeah, but make sure you don't like leave holes when you're answering their questions.
Correct. You don't want to give them more opportunities.
Make it simple and to the point.
Don't leave holes like Swiss cheese.
Exactly. Then, not only do you want to identify weaknesses, you want to attack weaknesses. So sometimes in your question, you're just going to kind of point out that there's a problem and say, oh, there's a hole. Sometimes you want to actually run the Big Mac truck right through that hole, and you want to exploit it and show the whole audience, wow, this is a really bad argument on their side. Finally, you want to gain credibility. Gain credibility.
Is that a dog?
It's a really bad dog.
That looks like a dead squirrel.
Gain credibility. The judge is going to evaluate during the Crossfire. Are the questions that you're asking well thought out? Are you being polite while asking questions and answering questions? Are you sharing your time well? Are you interrupting? If you're interrupting, then you're going to look rude and the judge isn't going to be as persuaded by you. And finally, do you have strong responses to probing questions? So your credibility is being evaluated throughout the Crossfire. You want to make sure that you are keeping your credibility throughout the Crossfire. All right, let's talk about the special features.
So wait.
All right, let's talk about the special features of Crossfire compared to cross-examination. First, both sides are asking questions. Second, both sides are answering questions. Both sides have to take turns doing these 2 things. So you don't want to just ask the question and then ask another question and ask another question. After you get the answer to your question, you say, thank you, now do you have a question for me? Or after you finish answering a question, you might say, I have a question I'd like to ask you. May I ask you a question? And then they'll say yes, and you ask the
Or
question.
if they say no.
Well, generally they're going to say yes. Unless you ask 12 questions in a row.
They may ask a question, no. Well, I was what? Huh?
Yeah, then it could get a little awkward. More likely than not, they'll say yes. Both sides are on offense and defense all the time in Crossfire. And so think of this more like basketball compared to baseball. And so in baseball, you're either out batting or fielding, and doing one or the other. But in basketball, all it takes is a steal or somebody makes a basket and you instantly switch who's on offense and who's on defense. And that's how Crossfire is going. You're going to be on offense for 1 minute and then on defense. And so you're going to ask a question, and then that's when you're on offense, and then you're going to be asked a question immediately after that, and that puts you on defense. The last thing to remember is that both sides are always communicating, no matter what you're doing. Whether you're standing there listening to a question being asked, whether you're asking a question, whether you're answering, all those things you're doing is communicating. Either I'm confident and I know what I'm doing.
Verbally or non-verbally.
Exactly. What are your goals when asking questions? There's 3 goals, 3 P's when asking questions. The first is you need to plan ahead. Plan ahead. What are 2 or 3 weaknesses that you want to expose? Devontae, why 2 or 3? What do we know about 3 things?
Because it's
3. If you're asked more than 3 questions, then most likely you're going to forget.
Exactly. So you want to come up with 2 or 3 big reasons, 2 or 3 big weaknesses in your opponent's case. That's what you want to hone in on. So plan ahead. What are those 2 or 3 weaknesses you and your partner want to go after? Second thing, you want precise questions. Precise questions. You want to ask about the exact thing you want to be asking about. So if you care about the number of people who get a certain type of organ donation, then you want to ask precisely about that. You don't want to ask a question and say, well, do people get organ donations in the United States? Well, the answer is obviously yes. If you want to know exactly the number or the number of people who are on a certain waiting list, you need to ask precisely that question and keep it short, because a short question is going to be a better question. And finally, you want to be polite. But while you're being polite, you need to be firm. So you don't want to back down when they don't want to answer the question, or if they're trying to evade your question. You want to still go after them. But you want to be polite.
You can say, excuse me, but you are avoiding the actual question. Yeah.
That's the exact response you need to have is, I'm sorry, I'd like you to answer this question, and would you like me to repeat it? And if they say yes, then you repeat it, and then make sure that they're actually answering it. So ask your question, and then allow your opponent to do the same thing after you've asked your question and gotten an answer.
Excuse me, Devontae, but you are avoiding the question.
Exactly.
Could you please answer?
Turn to page 2.
They're just creepy, all of them.
Yep.
What are your goals when answering the question? So we had 3 P's for asking questions, and now we're going to have 3 C's for answering the questions. You want to have a concise response. Don't admit more than you're asked. Don't waste time with long answers. If you're just filibustering and talking for the sake of talking, the audience is going to know that, and they're not going to believe you. You aren't going to be credible.
Or they'll get bored.
Exactly, or they'll get bored. Also, if you start going on and on, you're much more likely to make some sort of mistake that you don't want to be making and set yourself up for an argument down the line. So answer exactly what they've asked. So if they ask, are there people in the world who benefit from organ donation?
Yes.
Yes. And you
There
might
are
be
many
done.
people in the world who benefit from
Right.
organ donations.
The second thing is a calm response. Calm response. So even if they start asking questions that make you uncomfortable and you're thinking, oh my goodness, they're poking a really big hole in my case. I mean, the key is not to worry about where their question's going. Answer correctly, answer strategically, but be calm. Because this shows the judge that you're confident enough in your side that you're willing to answer any question they ask. Even if they ask you an irrelevant question, you want to be calm. You don't want to get out of hand. Finally, champion your side. Champion your side. Find opportunities to highlight the strengths of your case. So if they ask you some wide open question, why would it be beneficial to allow people to pay for organs? And you're the pro? Then maybe you say, well, I have 3 reasons, and those 3 reasons just happen to be my 3 contentions, and they are this, this, and this. And now you've gotten a chance to champion your case. Tell the judge, tell the audience why your side is the right side. Highlight the strengths in your case whenever you get a chance to do it. Questions so far?
Seems good to me.
Next, how do we come up with good questions? Secrets to coming up with good questions. The first thing to do is set up arguments you have already prepared. Arguments you've prepared already. What dilemma do you want to expose in the other side's arguments? Think about that before you get up in the round, before the round even starts. I know that people are arguing these things on the pro. I'm going to be con. What are the dilemmas that I want them to have to talk about in Crossfire? Second, don't ask open-ended questions.
Basically the opposite of champion your side.
Exactly. It's very much the opposite of championing your side. You don't want to be the one asking the, why would it be good to allow people to pay for organs? Well, what are you going to do? If you get that question, Devontae, you're just going to take it and run with it. You're going to be like, well, I have 3 really good reasons that we should allow people to pay for organs. And you don't want to ask those open-ended questions. Finally, if something sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. So,
99% of people die because they don't have any organs.
Exactly. Or what if somebody makes an argument that if the government provides some sort of financial incentive for organ donation, no one will ever die because they need an organ? Well, that sounds great, but do we really think that's true? There's clearly going to be people out there who will probably still die. Maybe they have a lot of money, but they have a really rare blood that is hard to find matching organs for, right? There's all sorts of reasons that somebody could still die. So when they kind of make these extreme categorical statements, so everyone, no one, all those sorts of statements, then that's probably a good bet that they've gone a little too far. All right, let's talk about the Grand Crossfire. The Grand Crossfire. This is the very last part we're going to talk about today. The Grand Crossfire. So in the Grand Crossfire, we have all 4 debaters. So in this situation, cooperation and teamwork are really, really important. You have to make sure you're allowing everyone to participate. So that means when your partner is standing up talking, you and your partner have to make sure you coordinate together to both ask questions, both answer questions. But you don't want to interrupt your partner. So how do you avoid interrupting your partner?
Just plan on it beforehand.
Well, plan beforehand. One thing that I think is really valuable is you're both going to be standing roughly at the desk, right? Or at the table of some sort. Come up with some sort of signal. So maybe it's your partner reaching out his or her hand to the front of the table and kind of leaning forward so that you will see them while you're talking. And that's kind of the signal that I would like to cut in. And at that point, you can turn to them and say, did you have something to say? And they can just kind of pick up right there. And so you want it to look like it's natural, where even though you aren't the same person, you're speaking with one voice. Just like we've talked about before, you have 2 speakers speaking with one voice throughout the debate round. In the same way, you want to do that exact same thing in Crossfire, in the Grand Crossfire.
You know what that?
Finally, no team questioning. You don't want to both ask parts of the same question. Either Devontae's going to ask the whole question, or Alan's going to ask the whole question, or someone else is going to ask the whole question. It's okay if you kind of split up answering a question, but you definitely only want one person to ask the question, because we're asking those precise questions, right? Those precise, short questions. It's really bad if you have 2 people kind of just mixing it up. It'll make it harder for people to follow. Question selection is even more important. Why is question selection more important? Because you have even fewer questions to ask and answer in the Grand Crossfire. There's 4 people now, so you have to divide that 3 minutes by 4 people asking and answering questions. So you're only going to get a couple questions, and as a result, you want to be very careful about the questions you select. You want to politely persuade. Politely persuade. After this Grand Crossfire, your team will only have 1 more minute to argue for your position. That's not enough time to take care of the damage if you are impolite or rude, or if you make really bad question selection. You want to make sure that everything you're doing in that Grand Crossfire is pointing the judge toward wanting to vote for you after you give your final focus speech. How do we pick the questions and answers in the final focus, or in the Grand Crossfire? You want to ensure that all the questions still matter to the debate. Don't start asking about things that have been resolved or that no one has been talking about since the constructive speeches. If it wasn't brought up in the summary speeches, you probably don't want to bring it up in the Grand Crossfire. What does this mean? You need to flow the summary speeches really well so that you know everything that's still on the table. Second, you want to focus on the key disagreements that are going on in the round and why you're winning those disagreements. So, If there's a disagreement about how many people there are in the world who need organs, and you're on the pro side saying there's lots more people than are even on these lists, then focus on that and say it's because there's this vast number of people who aren't even on the list that we should allow people to pay to get on the list, or we should allow people financial compensation if they are willing to give their organs up for donation. And finally, tie every question that they ask you into your winning arguments. So you think about in your final focus, what are my voting issues? What are the 2 or 3 reasons, right, that I'm going to be voting, the judge should vote for me, that the audience should vote for me? Think about those even in advance of the Grand Crossfire. Because if you've thought about that in advance, then you're able to focus on those arguments and tie the questions they ask into those kinds of arguments. If you do that, then it's going to make your audience that much more likely to think, wow, even the questions that they're being asked show me how they should win this round. And so you're always focusing in eventually, while you're politely persuading, the question and answer selection is going to ultimately narrow the judge and the audience down to vote for your side of the resolution. So that's how Crossfire works. That's what Crossfire looks like. It's a little different than cross-examination, but it's definitely a really useful thing to learn to do. And I think it's going to make public forum a much more interesting and kind of lively format of debate for us to use.